I'm Mark Irons. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, class dismissed. President Trump is set to sign an executive order to shutter the Department of Education. We're at the White House. Upheaval in Haiti. Protesters clash with police as they demand protection from gang violence. This story rocks, an opportunity to own a piece of the famous Notre Dame Cathedral. Plus, Holy Must See. A popular video game is working hand in hand with the Vatican to provide students with a unique experience. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us. I'm Mark Irons in for Tracy Sabol. Our top story tonight, President Donald Trump signs an executive order aimed at closing the doors of the Department of Education for good. That order was signed this afternoon at the White House at an event in the East Room that was filled with students, educators, and parents, as well as governors.
My administration will take all lawful steps to shut down the department. We're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible. It's doing us no good. We want to return our students to the states where just some of the governors here are so happy about this. They want education to come back to them, to come back to the states, and they're going to do a phenomenal job.
Long before today arrived, President Donald Trump made it clear he's no fan of the Department of Education. The Trump administration says the agency has spent trillions of dollars over the decades but failed in its mission to educate students. And many of the federal agency's staff recently received layoff notices. But there are critics of the move as well. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Good evening, Mark. The Trump administration says tonight the current status quo is failing our students, but others worry children will be left behind.
Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told EWTN what she would say to critics of the president's education plan.
Where was their criticism of our nation's failing test scores for the last several decades?
Leavitt said, "Our children's test scores are incredibly concerning, including in reading, science, and math, and that the return on taxpayer dollars has been less than ideal."
This president is finally taking much needed action to return education to where it belongs, and that's to educators closest to students in their classrooms in their respective states.
But it's unclear how many states want to take over the education department's responsibilities.
The State Department of Education has had funding cut after funding cut after funding cut.
Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia, the top Democrat on the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, says in a statement, President Trump's executive order has little regard for the irreparable harm it will cause to students, educators, our future workforce, and parents who are already struggling. Moreover, this move will force more dedicated civil servants with invaluable institutional knowledge out of the federal government. Trump's action will shrink the department, but completing its dismantling is most likely impossible without an act of Congress.
As you know, the president's executive order directed Linda McMahon to greatly minimize the agency. So when it comes to student loans and Pell Grants, those will still be run out of the Department of Education.
Federal funding makes up roughly 14% of public school budgets. The money often supports supplemental programs for vulnerable students, including homeless students, disabled students, or Title I for low-income schools. A prominent teachers union questions the cuts.
I think we could all do a better job in terms of education. I'm just surprised that the president is not working with the teachers in classrooms throughout the country, as represented by their union, to make things better.
Earlier this year, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops noted that the bishops are committed to education regardless of what happens with the Department of Education, and that the USCCB remains committed to upholding the education mission of the Catholic Church that is carried out locally in our parishes and schools.
Leavitt also told reporters when it comes to educating American children, the U.S. is not keeping up with its allies or adversaries, and calling that a national security issue. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Trade tensions brought on by increased tariffs between the U.S. and other countries are leading to uncertainty regarding the economy. The stock market has seen a volatile couple of weeks as the president announced he will increase tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. In return, retaliatory tariffs have been announced for the United States. Due to the uncertainty of the economy, the Federal Reserve announced yesterday that it will keep interest rates steady for the time being, leading to more uncertainty about just how strong the economy is. Joining us now is Jeffrey Campbell, professor of economics at the University of Notre Dame. Dr. Campbell, thank you for joining us. Let's go to what President Trump said, posting on Truth Social. He said he had a message for the Federal Reserve. He said the Fed would be much better off cutting rates as U.S. tariffs start to transition or ease their way into the economy. Is the president right? Would the Fed be better off cutting rates?
Here, I have to respectfully disagree with President Trump. I believe that the Fed's rates are designed to meet its two goals, what's called the dual mandate of stable prices and maximum sustainable employment. And stable prices means inflation at about 2%, and maximum sustainable employment means, at the current junction, unemployment right about where it is at 4.1%. Currently, inflation is running above 2%, about 2.7, 2.6%. And so that calls for tighter rates than normal, not looser rates. I argued back in September that the Fed was aiming to get to lower rates too quickly. Fortunately, from my perspective, they've stepped back from that, and they've lowered rates at about the rate that I would think is appropriate given the macroeconomic conditions. I don't see the tariffs as substantially changing macroeconomic conditions, and certainly not in a way that would call for actually lower rates.
Well, in the announcement yesterday, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell explicitly mentioned the tariffs. Let's take a listen.
It is going to be very difficult to have a precise assessment of how much of inflation is coming from tariffs. The answer is clearly some of it. A good part of it is coming from tariffs.
So one question might be, how long will it be before the effects of tariffs on inflation will be known?
It could be quite a long time. I have to disagree with what Chair Powell just said there. Again, respectfully, we don't necessarily see very much pass-through for tariffs, even over very long periods of time. We didn't see a lot of pass-through from lower tariffs when China acceded to the World Trade Organization. And so for that reason, I don't see a lot of reason that we're going to see much pass-through from tariffs going up in the near future. So I think that my baseline forecast is that the manufacturers will absorb the tariff hikes in their markups, and consumers won't see very much change.
Well, let me ask you this. Some are concerned a recession is on the horizon. Your thoughts? Are we close to a recession?
No, I don't think so at all. I can understand where that's coming from, because a lot of the headlines are talking about things that we as economics professors teach are economically damaging. We typically teach that that tariffs are damaging, that uncertainty is damaging. That's all very good, but the headlines don't take into account the quantitative significance of what's going on. And personally, I don't see what's going on now as very quantitatively significant. So there's no real indication in the incoming data that we're heading into a recession. The Fed's own survey of summary of economic projections doesn't say that we're going into a projection. I agree with them on, or going into a recession. I agree with them on that. I think that's probably overblown.
Well, Jeffrey Campbell from the University of Notre Dame, thank you for sharing your perspectives.
Thank you, Mark.
Two major stories making news out of Congress. A number of pro-life lawmakers are seeking to repeal the FACE Act, which Republicans say has been used against pro-lifers protesting near abortion clinics. Plus, the fireworks intensify among the courts, the White House, and Congress over the deportation of illegal aliens. Let's check in with Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales with the latest. Eric?
Hey, good evening there, Mark. Yes, the halls of Congress are all quiet up here on Capitol Hill. That's because lawmakers are in recess, but that's not stopping Republican lawmakers from speaking out in their home states. Many are angry about a judge's decision to temporarily halt President Trump's order to deport Venezuelan gang members. They, along with President Trump, are now calling for the impeachment of the judge who issued the ruling. Republicans say that there is strong public support for President's actions.
The big issue is that 77 million people voted for Donald Trump, and they voted for him to get these criminals out of our country, to make sure that we're safe and secure in our communities. He's trying to honor that.
House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan didn't rule out starting impeachment proceedings against Judge Boardsford.
We plan on holding hearings, hearing from experts, talking about this whole kind of body of law, this whole situation. Again, everything is on the table. We're considering all options.
Impeaching a federal judge would take 67 votes in the U.S. Senate. Democratic Senator Chris Coons, a member of the Judiciary Committee, says it's not going to happen. He says the real issue is whether federal court orders will be followed.
Deporting people, that's less the issue than whether or not this long-standing core pillar of the United States and our system will be respected by the Trump administration. Of course, they're picking one of the least sympathetic cases possible to push the very limits of their power.
Also on the Hill, there's a growing call among pro-life lawmakers and groups to repeal the 1994 FACE Act. Legislation makes it a federal crime to use force, the threat of force, or physically obstruct anyone from abortion clinics. Pro-life Congressman Chip Roy and more than 25 pro-life lawmakers introduced a bill calling for the permanent end to the law. He wrote, quote, Americans just spent the last 4 years being targeted by a weaponized justice system. The FACE Act was one of the primary weapons of abuse being used to politically target, arrest, and jail pro-life Americans for speaking out and standing up for life.
And pro-life Congressman Dan Bishop offered another way to fix the issue: just cut federal funds going to these abortion clinics. By the way, the Republican-led House Judiciary Committee, they received a 33% funding increase for this year's Congress, which will likely be used to investigate actions of the Biden administration. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
An American man held for more than 2 years by the Taliban is now free. George Glesman, shown in the middle holding a blue bag, was abducted while traveling through Afghanistan as a tourist. He was released in a deal brokered by negotiators for the United States and Qatar. The airline mechanic from Atlanta is the third American detainee to be released by the Taliban since January. Now to the Middle East, where Israel is keeping up on its strikes against the Gaza Strip, while Hamas fires back for the first time since the fighting resumed. Sirens rang out in Tel Aviv following the Hamas rocket attack. The terrorist organization responded after Israel struck several homes in the Gaza Strip, killing at least 85 Palestinians, according to Gaza health officials. Rescuers found a baby girl just weeks old in the rubble who lost her parents and brother in the strike. Meanwhile, Israeli police used water cannons after hundreds of Israelis gathered outside the Jerusalem residence of Prime Minister Netanyahu. The demonstrators were voicing their concern with his handling of the hostage crisis. Senior officials from countries across Europe met today to iron out details of an international peacekeeping force for Ukraine. This comes as a partial ceasefire in the war is worked out between Russia and Ukraine. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says plans for a peacekeeping force are moving into an operational phase despite the ongoing negotiations. Russia and Ukraine both launched hundreds of drone attacks overnight, injuring several people and damaging buildings. And protest in Haiti took a violent turn in Port-au-Prince as demonstrators attempted to reach the Prime Minister's office. Police held the protesters back using tear gas. The locals were demanding protection against gangs after hearing threats of a gang invasion for days. Taking matters into their own hands, residents armed themselves with knives and machetes, blocking roads with trees and burning tires. 85% of the capital is controlled by gangs. We have a lot more still to come on EWTN News Nightly, including blasphemy in Kansas. A group plans to hold a black mass on Capitol grounds. We speak to Catholics who are fighting back. And Catholic history in your own hand, how you could get a stone from the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Another high-profile legal fight over deportation proceedings is brewing. This time it involves the detention of a Georgetown University researcher in the U.S. on a valid visa. Badar Khan Suri is an Indian national studying peace-building in Iraq and Afghanistan. According to DHS, he was actively spreading Hamas propaganda and spreading anti-Semitism on social media. The university says it is not aware of him engaging in any illegal activity. This comes 2 weeks after immigration officers arrested Mahmoud Khalil. He led some of the pro-Palestinian protest on the campus of Columbia University last year. The White House has accused Khalil of having ties to Hamas, which he denies. The Trump administration tried to deport him despite the fact he is a legal permanent resident who has not been accused of a crime. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to trigger a snap election this weekend. A government official close to the matter says Carney will go to the Governor General on Sunday and request to dissolve Parliament. The vote is expected for April 28th. Carney was sworn in last week as the country faces a trade war with the U.S. Staying in Canada, church leaders are slamming a government proposal to ban faith groups from receiving certain tax credits. In question is a plan to strip charitable status from so-called anti-abortion and advancement of religion nonprofits. Responding to concerns from church leaders, a government spokeswoman said in part, the Finance Department, quote, continues to explore ways to ensure the tax system remains fair and effective in supporting Canadians and the organizations that serve them. A legal fight is brewing between the faithful and Satanists who are planning to celebrate a black mass in Kansas. The group, called the Satanic Grotto, wants to use the state capitol for its satanic rituals. The Catholic Archbishop Joseph Naumann has sued the group, alleging that they have unlawfully obtained a consecrated host and wine. Joining us now for more is Chuck Weber, Executive Director of the Kansas Catholic Conference. Thank you for joining us today, Chuck.
Great to be with you.
Well, first, some good news to report regarding that consecrated host. It seems that the group does not have one. Is that correct?
That's right. So we had a legal proceeding this morning in Leavenworth State District Court, about an hour from Topeka, Kansas, where I'm located. And basically, we called the bluff of this satanic leader and said, look, if you have the Eucharist, you need to tell us that. And so we got him on the stand and we asked him the question point blank under oath, and he denied having it. So this guy works for the Prince of Lies, right? We don't know if he's telling the truth or not, but we have it on the record now that he says he does not have the sacred Eucharist, and that he will not have the sacred Eucharist in the near future.
Still, the Satanic Grotto is planning on holding the Black Mass. How are Catholics responding in Kansas?
Yeah, I don't really know what constitutes a Black Mass, but everything that I've read, they must have a Eucharist, a consecrated host, what we believe is the body and blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. But so we don't believe that a Black Mass is going to happen. We don't know exactly what they're going to do on Friday, March 28th. The way that we're responding is that we're asking people to come here to Topeka if they would like. Assumption Catholic Church is located directly across from the Capitol. We were going to have an adoration hour, a holy hour, starting at 11 a.m. and then Mass at noon. We have a Mass here every day at noon. Archbishop will be here for that Mass. And we just want a peaceful, prayerful presence, no conflict with the satanic people or any of the bad guys whatsoever. So prayer, fasting, and abstinence.
Well, the governor of Kansas recently issued a directive ordering that this so-called Black Mass be held outside the Capitol, not in the rotunda as originally planned. But she also said that she has a duty to protect the First Amendment rights of citizens. Legally, can this be seen as an abuse of the First Amendment?
Well, earlier this week, a lot of developments have unfolded here at the state capitol. Our attorney general came forward and said that at the time, we had reason to believe that this satanic group had stolen the Eucharist from the Catholic Church. So if that was the case, then this is stolen property, and also they were going to desecrate it or destroy it. And under those guidelines that the attorney general outlined, that this event should not go forward. Now, I don't know how that affects what happened this morning, because I think that we are fairly comfortable that they do not have the Eucharist, but we didn't like, first of all, that they were allowed in the Capitol in the first place. And then they moved it outside and they said, oh, this is better. Well, it's like moving something really, really bad from your living room to your front porch. That didn't sit well with us at all. So now we do not believe a Black Mass is going to happen. We don't know what the Satanists are going to do on March 28th. We're going to be ready with prayer, fasting, abstinence, Mass, the sacraments.
Chuck Weber, thank you so much for that update.
You're welcome.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, between a rock and a holy place, your chance to own a piece of historic Notre Dame Cathedral. Plus, a feast and some food, how the faithful in Rome celebrated the solemnity of St. Joseph. The Solemnity of St. Joseph takes on special meaning around the world, especially in Rome, where events last night wrapped up more than a week of planning. EWTN Vatican contributor Valentina Di Donato has more.
On the Feast of St. Joseph's in Rome, hundreds of people from near and far gather to celebrate the saint and the tradition of community. And in Italy, there's also another reason to be so festive.
Today is also Father's Day, because Joseph is the special father, the Father of God. But I also like to think of Joseph as the one who helped Jesus to understand God as a father. This understanding that Jesus had of God as merciful, compassionate, tender, where did he learn this? Or rather, where did he begin to understand this? That a father is supposed to be like this. I believe he learned it from Joseph.
On this day at the Basilica of St. Joseph in Trionfale, just north of the Vatican, the holy cloak of St. Joseph and a piece of the veil that is believed to have belonged to the Virgin Mary are also on display for this special occasion. The relics arrived in Rome in the 4th century after Christ, thanks to St. Jerome, who on his trip to Bethlehem rediscovered them. Ever since, the relics have been safeguarded at the Basilica of St. Anastasia on the Palatine Hill in Rome, but are brought out several times a year to be venerated by the faithful.
For us, these are exceptional days. It is a gift the Church of Rome has given us, this opportunity not only to see the relics, but also to experience the closeness of Mary and Joseph. Today they are united, just as they were in their married life. Today they are united here through these relics.
For many pilgrims traveling to Rome for the Jubilee year, the celebration is a moment of renewal of faith and strengthening of their sense of community.
Today was going in there and seeing the relics, going through the holy doors. For me, just being around Rome and I see Jesus everywhere. This interview, the churches, the people, listening to the people talk, watching people pray, it moves me and it renews my Catholic faith in a way that I don't think I can express in words.
Faith and traditions go hand in hand. The folklore and the food that surround these events are another element that brings people together year after year. Settima is one of the volunteers that helps to keep the tradition of frying zeppole and frittelle, one of the feast's mainstays, alive. And to her, the traditions of the Catholic faith that stretch back generations are a way to reinforce the human connection.
They are important because they remind us of who we are and who we want to be. Because if we lose who we are, our origins, our grandparents, and our parents' legacies, what will happen to the future?
It is a reminder of how belief is best served when shared. In Rome, Valentina Di Donato, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, a new initiative is sending people home with pieces of Notre Dame Cathedral. The Heritage Foundation in France is leading a raffle for 50 original stones from the world-famous church in Paris. The pieces were not used in the recent renovation of the cathedral. The funds raised will be used to preserve religious monuments throughout France. The raffle will be open until April 4th and is open to adults from all over the world. Finally tonight, a popular video game is launching a new educational edition featuring the Vatican. Minecraft now has an edition that challenges students to explore and restore St. Peter's Basilica. Microsoft and the Vatican unveiled the game this week as part of a collaboration on an AI-enhanced experience of St. Peter's Basilica. A student who got to test out the game added that he thinks Blessed Carlo Acutis would love it. We thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Mark Irons. Good night and God bless.